Okay, Greg Anthony here, and glad you're back on the Investigative Journal on this March 17th, 2017 day on our calendar. My guest today is Deborah Ondrisek of the Alamo Ministry, and we have a lot of good information for you regarding the Tony Alamo case and some letters that people have written on behalf of Tony. I want to get to those in a minute, but before I bring you Deborah, let me give you my Jesuit quotes of the day. Why don't we go directly to Nazi Germany and listen to what Adolf Hitler had to say. It's quite interesting. I read this a long time ago, and I've done a number of quotes on Hitler. And as far as the connection between Pope Pius XII and Hitler, it's without a doubt that the facts tell us that he was the mentor of Adolf Hitler. In fact, we've presented information that Mein Kampf was written by a Jesuit priest. But none of this stuff ever gets into the mainstream forum. Why? I can't understand it. The only thing I can say is that they must be covering up for the Vatican connection to our country. Well, anyway, here's what Hitler said. Above all, I have learned from the Jesuits, and I think so did Lenin too, as far as I recall. The world has never known anything quite so splendid as the hierarchical structure of the Roman Catholic Church. There were quite a few things I simply appropriated from the Jesuits for the use of the Nazi Party. And in Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of the Nazi SS, I see our Ignatius Loyola. Wow, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Now, tell me why our history books never talk about this. And like I've said before, I want all my money back from these universities. And all my money that I spent on U.S. history and American history and world history, that they never talk about the truth. Oh well, we know it's Jesuit education. So, let's get to my guest, Deborah Ondrisek. Deborah's been with me a number of times, and if you followed my shows, we've talked much about the persecution of this ministry. First of all, let me just say a few facts. It's a Christian ministry, a Bible-believing ministry. They don't carry weapons. They're not out preaching insurrection and overthrow of our government. They're there to preach the Bible, and they just happen to have the same view of it as our Protestant reformers did when they protested against who? The Vatican, and all of the things that the Vatican was doing to try to keep people from reading the Bible. In fact, the Jesuit order was created for that. However, today, the same thing is going on, but in a much more insidious way. They don't take these people and cut their heads off. What they do is they create a media campaign against them, calling them a cult, calling them child abusers, and then they go in with the BATF and FBI, who are on the side of the people I'm talking about. And they raid this ministry, finally, after 40 years of persecution. They frame the pastor, who's never been a child abuser. They take away the children as if they were in danger, when none of the child abuse charges that were leveled against these parents were ever proven. And thirdly, now, to really seal the deal, they want to steal all their property. Now, tell me why they do this, when, in fact, if we look to just upstate New York, I dare anyone to go up there, to a place called Islamburg, what you're going to find there is a group of radical Islamists who are actually been photographed by the FBI, marching with guns, preaching death to America, and they've been given 60 acres of property, and there's over 300 of these people up there. Now, that's not even the beginning of it. There are about 30 or 40 other compounds in our country just like it. And when someone in their infinite wisdom asked somebody in authority, well, why don't you kick them out? They say, well, we're monitoring the situation, and we can't kick them out because they are not a legal terrorist organization on our terrorist list. Well, why don't you arrest them? Why don't you do something? Take their guns away. They do nothing. They allow them to exist, while at the same time, they will take this ministry and basically run them through the ringer. Deborah, I hope I've given a pretty good example of why I believe the Vatican, along with our government, wants to destroy Christianity, and they're putting up a good front. What's your thoughts on what I said? And then we'll get into some of these letters.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. It's always good to be back. And I was wondering if we are on the terrorist list, because obviously they've done everything in their power to obliterate us. And I think it's a horrible situation where we have these camps in our country, and I believe there's probably more than even what you mentioned that we don't even know about, because they're not going to tell the American people what they're really doing. And yeah, so they're actually aiding and abetting these terrorist cells within our country.
Now, you know what would happen if, for example, Trump went in there and they decided to kick out these Muslims? You would hear the left-wing radicals at Berkeley and all over the country come to their assistance. You can't throw out these people. It's racial prejudice. And at the same time, I do not hear one sound from them coming to your aid. It's crazy, isn't it?
That's right.
It's crazy.
That's right. And they've already got these people in line that are going to say that we're doing a racial thing against these people. We have the radicals already set up to do that, and to the agenters, the people that will go in and stir up trouble, and anything that's good or right is going to be opposed by. It's all set up, it's in place, and they're doing what they've planned to do.
Yeah, exactly. And before you get to these letters, I just wanted to say, go to freetonyalamo.com. It's a website I started, and you can read about this case. And also then at the top of the page, you can click on and go to the petition and sign it if you choose, that we're going to send to Donald Trump as we're trying to get Tony released this year, get his sentence commuted when Trump's pardon attorney takes over. So, Deborah, I know Tony was basically convicted. We talked about this many times, falsely. And some of the girls from the ministry, there were like 4 or 5 of them, came and testified against him. And it was really a travesty because these girls were picked out by the FBI. They were basically girls that maybe had a bone to pick with somebody at the ministry, or basically succumbed to the bribes that the FBI had offered them. And to this day, I've checked into it, at least 2 of the girls that I know about are receiving money monthly on top of the settlements they've been promised, hundreds of thousands of dollars, I hear. Well, tell me about that first, and then tell me about these letters that you want to get to today.
Yes, it is true, and they are receiving a government check every month. So they weren't just bribed, they were supported. They're going to be supported, I guess, for the rest of their lives for bringing down this ministry, for helping the government. When these girls left the ministry, they left at different times from each other. Some of them went to their families, and they had no intentions of going to the FBI, and they didn't go to the FBI. The FBI came to them and offered them a deal they couldn't refuse, because they were already not planning on going back to the ministry at that point, and they were told a pack of lies, and so they jumped right on the bandwagon, because when you're offered a lot of money, and it just wasn't hundreds of thousands of dollars, they had, I believe it was a $500 million judgment that they were granted. So we're talking $500 million to split up and to do with it what they wanted. So they were just government pawns, and they were people that, and that's what the government does. And really, this kidnapping people from our ministry or bribing them is not really anything new. They were doing that back in the 70s, where there were several different people at different times. They had police raids on our ministry, and they take the person right out of services and take him to a deprogrammer, somebody that their parents had hired to get them to turn against the ministry and turn against their beliefs and the beliefs that they had found in the Lord Jesus Christ. And yeah, there were several of those that have done that. And then they were taking them to the beginnings of the cult awareness
network,
whatever they call it. And they were taking them, that was like the beginnings of it. They were taking them there, and it was a way that the government found that they could get into our ministry by using people and people that were in the ministry, getting them out, brainwashing them, so to speak, getting them totally let go of their beliefs in the Lord Jesus Christ and the Bible and what they have been taught about the Bible, and then turn over to the side of the government to be used against the ministry to help destroy it.
You know, before you get to these letters, I just wanted to make it clear that Tony Alamo, the pastor, and this ministry was probably one of the loudest voices in the world regarding the truth about the Vatican's connections to our government, what they're doing worldwide, as well as not afraid to talk about them the way the Protestant reformers did, referring to the book of Revelation, pointing out the Antichrist system. And what it showed me was that they do not tolerate this at the level that you guys were doing it. The millions of brochures, the number of people that were starting to catch on to this, they had to silence you. Now, if you look at just people that do radio shows like I do, or others who write small books, what they do to people like me is marginalize us and call us kooks, call us conspiracy theorists, never allowing the voice to get out in the public mainstream news to talk to millions like they do. And that's how they operate. So the reason they came after you so hard is because you were really, Tony was, on many radio shows all over the world. I mean, it was incredible, and I watched this happen. And it just told me that there was no freedom of religion left in this country. And once the Vatican has grown in our country to be this voice, the Pope, if we look at this, Deborah, it's really interesting. The Pope controls the Roman Catholic population. When he says immigration is okay, everybody in America that's a Roman Catholic goes, well, then we shouldn't allow Donald Trump to stop people from coming into our country that may harm us. We can't allow a Muslim ban, or we can't allow him to even extremely vet these people so that people are protected, while illegal immigration are killing a lot of Americans. So it isn't only just religious here. He goes into the political realm and sways people's minds, and they can't have a group like you talking against them. It's that simple to me. Yes.
Yeah, protesting.
Am I off base on what I said?
No, you're absolutely right. And protesting like the old Protestant reformers did, who so many of them were put to death, they were burned at the stake for what they were doing, because they were revealing what the Antichrist Roman government was doing, the Roman Catholic cult was doing. And multitudes, millions upon millions of people that were Protestants and protesting were burned at the stake or killed in one way or another back in the 15 and 1600s and even 17 and 1800s, and it really has never stopped. It does go on to this day. You just don't hear about it. How many people really know what happened to our ministry? Now, no one's been put to death yet, but they gave our pastor 2 life sentences. He's 82 years old in prison, dying in prison, and we are trying to get him out. And where do you hear this on the news? Falsely convicted, falsely charged, and that's where it is today. That's why we come on your show and we tell you about what's going on. So we have one voice anyway.
Right, and the word spreads, and we're going to get this out one way or the other. Okay, we have to get to this. Tell me about the first letter you want to read.
Okay, this is from a brother who had been in the ministry since 1974, and he had one of his children, a boy, and 4 of his grandchildren taken away in the raid that they did at the Alamo Ministries when many of the children were taken away. And he was put in jail because he would not tell the authorities where his children and his wife were hiding. And also he has a pretty heavy statement of what they told him and they offered him in jail. So it's a very interesting letter here.
Okay, go ahead and read it.
To whom it may concern, I, Don Thorne, a proud member of Tony Alamo Christian Ministries since February 19th, 1974, want to reveal things that happened to myself and other brothers and sisters at our church. While I was on the job driving, the federal government raided our church and began taking our children. They ended up snatching one of my sons and 4 of my grandchildren. At this raid, there were helicopters, multitudes of policemen, the FBI, the Department of Human Services, and many other government agencies. They pulled over church vans which were traveling on a busy freeway and took the children from these vehicles. There were also the major and local news media there who were in on it too. I had 2 other children who didn't get taken in this raid, a teenage daughter and a son. I later went to court in Texarkana, Arkansas, before the late Judge Joe Griffin, who ordered me to be put in jail because I would not tell the government where my wife and other 2 children were hiding. They locked me up for 203 days because, of course, I wouldn't tell them. What kind of man would? Off to jail I went without bail, indefinitely. One day when I was in court at recess, an FBI agent named Randall Harris came to me and served me papers. They wanted me to be a witness for them. I thought, great, they got the right guy, because my testimony for Pastor Alamo would be truthful and good. Later on in jail, I was called out of my cell. I had a visit from a new lawyer, one from the FBI case on Pastor Alamo. The visit lasted about an hour. There was a lot of fear of being locked up for a long, long time, being thrown at me. He told me the government spent millions of dollars to take Tony down, and if they don't take him down, they would get me. I knew before God I had to do the right thing. I couldn't betray my pastor by being a false witness to save my own skin. I wouldn't give in to them. I had to trust the Lord. When I was first booked into jail and locked up, I knew I wasn't alone, that Jesus was with me. Many souls were saved there. I had over 100 pieces of Pastor Alamo's gospel literature with me, set out for any inmate who would want to read them. Many did, and when the nightly news came on with Pastor Alamo's case, those inmates who read his gospel literature did not believe the fake news about Pastor Alamo. They said that the man writing these gospel tracts was not the same man on the fake news. They weren't taken in with the slanderous lies on TV. At first, there was a lot of prejudice against me, but before it was over, guards would come up to me and say, "Thorne, you don't belong here." The night shift guard asked me if I would talk to an inmate who was in for murder and was suicidal. I did talk to him about the Lord, and he received Jesus as his Savior. It was so unfair, so unjust, a scam, a smear campaign against my pastor, Tony Alamo, and the whole ministry. I was innocent of any wrongdoing. There was nothing illegal or corrupt going on in my church, yet the government treated us so cruelly and took away everything we had built for ourselves and our families, including our homes, schools, church buildings, everything. Our pastor was railroaded to prison on made-up charges and given 2 life sentences after a mock kangaroo court trial and sentencing. After 203 days of being incarcerated, the Lord let me walk out a free man. I had appealed for a trial by jury. Of course, Judge Griffin did not want my case to be transparent for the public to see, so he wrote off time served. Pastor Alamo is a good pastor. He is innocent of all false charges and needs to come home. Pray with us, fight with us. Brother Don Thorne.
Wow, that's a powerful letter. What I get out of it is that they were trying to bribe him and basically said, if you testify against Pastor Alamo and help us, we'll let you out of jail right now, right?
That's exactly what they were saying. Yeah, they wanted him to turn testimony and go on their side and go against our pastor.
And also what's interesting is that they took his children just like they did yours, I believe, and others, and there never was any child abuse found, right?
That's absolutely right. Never, ever was there any child abuse found.
And when Don got out, did they ever find his other children and his wife?
They never found his other children that I know of, no. They
Good.
Never. The government never got his children, no.
So how many did they get total? About, was it like 30 or 35 kids that were taken into custody?
I think there were 36 altogether.
And all of these cases never really got much publicity, did they? I mean, people really didn't ever hear your side of the story, did they?
The only publicity they got was what they were told to say. We had a gag order, first of all, so we couldn't get our side of the story out. And when Don was in prison, he was also on a gag order. And all of us were. Nobody could say anything, and Judge Griffin threatened that if we did, he would put us in jail, and I believe that he would do it.
So basically, back when this was happening in 2008, if you wanted to come out and tell your side of the story, he would put you in prison. That's
what he said.
That to me sounds like a Nazi Germany type court, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. And then when those videos got leaked of the 6 girls giving their side of the story the day after they were taken into custody over in Texarkana, that got leaked, and then the other judge wanted to put me in jail for that. But they weren't able to.
Now, when you say leaked, what got leaked? When they, the girls that testified actually said there was nothing, they weren't harmed by Tony?
Oh, the 6 girls weren't the ones who brought that. They brought a later court case after they were deprogrammed, but they gave a true testimony of how life was in the ministry, and it was put up on YouTube. It may still be up there, but every one of them gave a really great testimony for the ministry and how happy they were, and that got leaked, and so they wouldn't let any of that be published in the Texarkana Gazette. But the Democrat down in Little Rock did publish part of their testimonies in their paper. And anyway, you have to go to YouTube to see it, but it was up there. And
Okay, yeah, send me that if you could. I think I've seen it before, but I've misplaced it. But send me that. But what I find interesting is the girls, they basically then turned on Tony after they were bribed, right?
Well, these girls did after they were bribed. These were ones that were put into foster homes where they were given computers, and they were given, a lot of them were young, and they were put in public schools. They were told how evil the ministry was, how evil their parents were. They were given iPhones and many, many things. My daughter was taken on cruises to Mexico, and she was taken on, 4, 5, 6 cruises in her foster home, and the other girls, some of them were also.
Hey, Deborah, hold that thought. We're going to come back. You got a couple more letters to read, and we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and my guest is Deborah Ondrisek of the Alamo Ministry. In the first half hour, you heard how one of the Christian members of the ministry was jailed for 203 days because he didn't want to tell the authorities where his children were, and also he didn't want to lie about his pastor and help them wrongfully convict Tony Alamo. During the break, Deborah was telling me about another woman who also went through the same thing, Deborah, correct? Another woman spent about the same time in jail for just under the same circumstances, right?
That's right. Sure did.
Well, you know, something needs to be done about this, folks. And, you know, if you're listening, you can send my radio shows to all your congressmen. Send it anywhere. And send a lot of the information you get at the website that we have, and also freetonyalamo.com. And help us out, because I'm telling you, the mainstream media and much of the controlled alternative media doesn't want to touch this story. And it just shows you that there really is no freedom of religion if we can't speak up against really something that's very important, and that is this connection between the Vatican and our government and what they're trying to do to us. Deborah, I know you have a couple other letters. Tell us about the next one you want to read to us.
Okay, the next one is from a young lady who is 12 years old, and she's not in the ministry anymore as regarding living on the property, but because there is no property to live on at this point. But she was 4 years old, and her family, there were quite a few children in her family, and they were all able to escape being taken. The mother was at the hospital giving birth that day, and they were not able to get the children because of that, and we're just thankful for that. And anyway, she, out of her history book, she had seen the rights, and she is sending an unsolicited letter standing up for our pastor. No one asked her to write this, and I thought it was pretty good of her. I thought it was a pretty good letter. So,
go ahead.
Actually, the letter is to President Trump. So, Dear Mr. President Donald Trump, my name is Deborah Edwards from the Tony Alamo Christian Ministries. I don't live there anymore because our home was taken away. I am 12 years old now. I was 4 years old when the 2 government raids happened at my church. These raids were very illegal because of our rights as American citizens. These are the exact words of the rights of Americans. And Greg, she actually got these from her school history book.
Okay.
And here's the first one. The right to worship God in one's own way. It was not right to put our pastor Tony Alamo in prison for his belief and preaching the gospel. Where is the right in that? The right to free speech and press. Some of the things he preached from the Bible do cause people to be offended, but that is because it is the living truth. Many people would rather believe a lie than to believe the truth, which is why he is in prison right now. Neither he nor his witnesses were able to give their sides of the story in court. The government is trying to shut him up for good. How is that freedom of speech? The right to privacy in our homes. If we had that right, then why did many of the ministry's children get torn from their homes, mothers and fathers, during the 2 raids? Why did some of the girls, including my 16-year-old aunt, get rounded up at machine gun point and taken away from their families, never to be returned to their parents again? The right to own private property. If we had that right, The government would not have taken away our homes from us to satisfy a judgment against our pastor, which was given to him after he lost a court case based on false testimony from bribed false witnesses who had been taken to deprogrammers at Wellspring Retreat, the Cult Awareness Network. How was that a right for me and my family who had our home taken and sold? Dear Mr. President, please get our pastor out of prison. He is 82 years old and is not in good health. He was put in prison on false charges and has been there for 8.5 years of a 175-year sentence for crimes he did not commit. If God be for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. Sincerely, Deborah Edwards, Santa Clarita, California.
Well, the truth comes out from children. I'll tell you something. I hope that he reads that letter. And please, people out there's been a number of letters sent to him already. And we're going to get this petition that was signed by hundreds of people with a lot of comments and testimony regarding Tony. And I hope they listen. Deborah, we got about 19 minutes, so let's get to this last letter. And let me preface it by saying I referred to it a few days ago on my show, but I think it's important that you read it with your comments, because it's a really interesting letter that was sent to Trump as well. And that will be the fourth letter that he's gotten. So tell us about this one. Go ahead.
Now, this is written from the grandmother of Jeannie Orlando, who is very knowledgeable about the situation and knowledgeable about her granddaughter and what has happened. It's a very good letter to President Trump. And it says, to President Trump, and to whom it may concern, hopefully someone that will do something. There are a great many people around this world who cannot understand and would like to know why Pastor Tony Alamo is being treated as if he were a terrorist, a hardened criminal. Let us consider the crimes he has committed and is in prison and being persecuted for. 1. His love for God, Jesus Christ, his fellow humanity, human souls, and his country. 2. His having enough concern for his fellow man to feed and clothe complete strangers of any belief who are in need and asking for help. 3. His not only telling people the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, but also housing, feeding, taking care of all their needs, for example, clothing, medical, dental expenses, schooling, transportation, spiritual counseling, Bible study, and 24-hour emergency counseling, as long as they want to serve the Lord and keep his commandments. I could go on and on. I have known Pastor Tony Alamo for nearly 47 years and knew his late wife Susan, both personally. Better friends I have never had. Always there to help physically and spiritually 24/7. Terrorist? Tony Alamo loves his country and is the most patriotic person I know. He is totally for the Republic of the USA. He was in the Navy and part of one of the top companies of servicemen of his time. No, he is not a terrorist. Quite the opposite. So why is he being held in a prison full of terrorists and being treated worse than them all? Tony is totally blind. He is 82 years old and suffers from diabetes and heart problems. His personal belongings were stolen numerous times. The authorities will not replace anything and wouldn't even let his wife send him a replacement pair of eyeglasses when he could see a little. They are at this present time inflicting psychological and mental torment on him. What has this world come to? Am I beloved USA with liberty and justice for all? A jury could not find Pastor Alamo guilty because there was absolutely no evidence. Yet he has been sentenced to federal prison for 175 years. They don't give terrorists, murderers, or traitors sentences even close to this length of time. But the now corrupted government hates my pastor because he exposes their wickedness and corruption and warns them of the wrath of God to come unless they repent. What do you think? Is this crime worthy of 175-year imprisonment? What about the teacher in San Antonio who was teaching the students how to assassinate the president-elect of our country last year? They produced a play depicting his murder. The teacher was reprimanded, no jail, no imprisonment, just a verbal slap on the wrist. Had this production depicted the murder of Barack Obama, I'm sure the punishment would have been drastic and long-lasting. Pastor Alamo's case sounds like an evil fairy tale or some bizarre movie. Well, truly it has been a real nightmare for him, his family, and all of us who are part of his congregation that love him dearly. My granddaughter, Jeanette Marie Orlando, who is now 38 years old, was born and raised in this ministry. Jeannie was our first grandchild, and her grandpa and I adored her. She spent as much time with us as she did with her family at home. Susan Alamo, who went on to be with the Lord in 1982, was very fond of Jeannie as a young child and often invited her to visit her at their home. As Jeannie became a teenager, her values started to change. She was no longer the sweet, innocent girl who loved the Lord with all her heart. She became moody and snappy. Her mom and dad were becoming very concerned, as her granddad and I were also. They went to Pastor Tony for counsel. Although Pastor Tony didn't really know Jeannie, he and his wife Sharon said they would do anything they could to help her, and they invited her to come and stay with them for a while so that she could help in the office and join in with Bible studies and prayer meetings. Jeannie was very happy. She had some secretarial skills. She loved swimming and helping with the animals and all of the activities. Everyone at the pastor's house treated Jeannie with kindness, and soon we all noticed a good and positive change taking place, which made us very happy and thankful. One day, Tony and Sharon and the sisters in the office loaded up in the car and headed up Highway 71 into town for some shopping and to take care of some errands. Suddenly, a large utility truck coming down the highway speeded up and headed straight for their car, nearly hitting them head-on. Had it not been for Angel, who was driving, swerving drastically to the right, almost flipping the vehicle completely over, they would have been killed. The side door was hit, ripped off its hinges, and flew off as Jeannie was being thrown out of the opening. Pastor Tony, being extremely alert and moving quickly, reached across to the back seat and grabbed her, preventing her from being hurled out of the open side of the car as it spun around. Tony risked his own life to keep Jeannie from being killed. At Pastor Tony's trial, Jeannie Orlando told the court that she was verbally and physically mistreated by him, along with many other lying accusations that she was coerced into saying by the former Cult Awareness Network Wellspring Retreat, an organization raised up to deprogram born-again Christians and make them denounce their belief and faith in Christ Jesus. The government agencies who were and still are trying to destroy Pastor Alamo and the worldwide Christian soul-winning ministry of ours offered Jeannie a lot of money, hundreds of thousands or more, to lie about the man who had so courageously saved her life. I must tell them of an event which finally led to the dismissal of Jeannie from our church. Jeannie went to Pastor Alamo and dramatically told him that her father, Joey Orlando, had molested her as a child, and as she grew older, had sex with her often. Because Pastor Tony never dreamed anyone would lie about such a horrifying set of circumstances, and because no immorality of any kind is allowed or ever has been in this ministry, Pastor Tony told Joey he had to leave the church. Jeannie's mother, my daughter, Lenore, took our grandchildren and left also. She was completely in shock. You tell me, what kind of a person would deliberately tell such a diabolical story about their own father if it wasn't true? Several months later, Jeannie went to Pastor Alamo and told him it was all a lie about what her father had done to her. The damage was done. Not long after all of this, Jeannie was put out of the church for her conduct and continuous lies. It is horrifying that my granddaughter is a pathological liar. Jeannie not only destroyed the lives of her family, but many precious families in the church with her lies. The children were taken by force from their upstanding parents who loved the Lord and loved and cherished their children. A first published news report was that the children that were taken from their families from the Alamo Christian Ministries were brilliant. There was no sign of any mental or physical abuse. They were happy, friendly, well-adjusted children who loved their parents, their families, and their church. The article was only published one time. My husband and I drove a follow-up vehicle on nearly every trip that Pastor Tony, his wife Sharon, and family took to California for business to visit the ministry there, and for Tony to see his cardiologist. He's had a heart problem for years. This was one of the trips that they used to bring the false accusation that Pastor Tony had an illicit affair on the bus while traveling to California. Most of the other counts involved travel of a few young women which traveled separately and apart from Tony. He did not even travel with them. My granddaughter made up one of the trips that never even happened. I was there. They are all filthy lies. I rode on the bus when my husband took his turn driving. Pastor Tony's wife was always right there. They conjure up such filthy things because that is how they fantasize. I'd like to add right here that, Greg, there was a situation where I took Jeannie and another sister to the airport in Little Rock and took them to the airport, and they flew out to California. I for sure did that with another sister. So there's no way they even traveled on that trip they were talking about. And then there was another time when actually my daughter, who had her driver's license at the time, and another sister, we had driven a couple of the secretaries down to the Dallas airport, where they got a plane and flew out to California. So it's all fantasy. It's all something that they've made up in their minds that the government has put there as a way to destroy this ministry.
Yeah, exactly. I want to make it clear to the listeners, since the prosecutors never had evidence that Tony sexually abused any girl, what they had to do is use what's called the Mann Act, which is an archaic law that was established in the early 1900s to basically stop pimps from taking prostitutes across state lines. Now, if you look at the history of this law, it has been used against certain enemies of the state to basically frame them. And since the law has been enacted, I checked out everybody that's been convicted of it, and Tony has got the harshest sentence of anybody. It hasn't even been used. It's been used one or two times in the last 30 or 40 years. The reason they did it was, they stated that because he'd crossed state lines with these girls, he could be convicted. Then, when even the jury came back to the judge during the trial and asked the judge, listen, can we still convict him even if we didn't find any abuse? Which means they were going, just because he crossed state lines with these girls, is that enough? Even though he didn't do anything? It'd be like me taking my car, traveling to Arizona with, let's say, a friend of mine and their daughter, who was 15 years old, and basically they then could convict me for sexual abuse even though I didn't do anything. And the judge basically wouldn't answer that question and said, just follow my instructions. So there you have it. I mean, it's incredible. That's why I call this the worst kangaroo court I've ever seen. And here we got more evidence that perhaps the girl wasn't even in the bus at the time, and you took her on an airplane ride. Incredible.
That's right. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and you know these girls. You were a teacher at the ministry, so you knew a lot of these girls. And I think your backup testimony would have been very helpful, but you weren't allowed to testify in court, were you?
No. No. As a matter of fact, the key witnesses that really would have been able to help were never called. And it was just such a miscarriage of justice. It was unbelievable. It was really only, I think, a 6-day trial. I know. It was unbelievable.
I've seen longer trials for petty larceny or something, you know.
Yes.
But another thing also we've talked about many times, there was let's just talk about an FBI agent, an undercover agent who was hired to bring you guys down, John Peeler, who's been on my show many times, stated that they could never find anything. And his bosses, he even gave me the names and numbers of his bosses at the time, years ago. I tried to get a hold of them. They wouldn't talk to me. He said he left the FBI because they wanted him to kill Tony. I mean, why wasn't he allowed to testify? Because that would have told the jury that this has been a frame job from the beginning, right?
That's right. That was the key witness, the main witness that really would have blown this court out of the water, but that wasn't allowed to happen. And nobody that had anything good to say. Like I said before, several times on your show, there were about 30 witnesses down in the courtroom on our kids' case. We were going to testify, and what they did was they held us in the courtroom after the judge gave the authority for them to round up all of our children. They held us there for at least 15 minutes. They locked the doors. The cops were standing there with the guns. We were not allowed to leave. I mean, to me, that was false imprisonment. But they were not going to let anybody. So that was like something to where it just broke up everything for the whole day. We were not going to be testifying at all because they destroyed it by taking our children away. What could we do? It was the most horrible situation.
Yeah, somebody send this show to Trump, will you please, or one of his attorneys in the Justice Department that wants to get, everybody's talking about how Christians are supporting him and he wants to give Christians the right to speak and all this stuff. So somebody send this show. I mean, it's unbelievable what's happened to this man and this ministry, and it's like Siberia here. I mean, That's basically what it is. I mean, you get better treatment in a Siberian court. And it's amazing what the media can do and how even these pastors of these ecumenical churches that will not help you guys, I hope someday they really look at themselves in the mirror, because I know I've tried to talk to pastors. I said, why don't you come to the rescue of this ministry? Well, you know something, they give me some double talk. It's incredible. But, we only have about 3 minutes. I did want to mention this. Don't forget to go to alamoministries.com, read about their side of the story. Go to that free Tony Alamo website I started, freeTonyAlamo.com. You can click on to get to the petition site and read some of the comments. There's hundreds of them from people all over the world that give you an idea of what this ministry is all about. Secondly, listen, I've had Bert Krantz, and you knew Bert well. His children were taken away. And he gives a startling story, and I want to add this to this show, because Bert has known Tony for over 40 years. They came to Bert and said, listen, if you help us convict Tony, give us some evidence that he's a child abuser, we'll give your children back to you right away. Bert refused to do it. He said, listen, I can't lie. I've known this man for 40 years. If he was a child abuser, I wouldn't be in this ministry. And I've talked to many of people in your ministry, and they said, listen, if these charges were true, if we knew Tony was a child abuser, we would have disassociated years ago. Correct?
That's right. Absolutely right.
And
that's how everybody feels. And they know he's not. This is a lying campaign.
Right. And, that to me is startling as well, that they would. And here's another guy. They went, and now we got Don Thorne. What's his name? Don Thorne?
Yes.
Okay. The same story. Randall Harris, who went to Bert, went to Don Thorne, and Don's giving testimony. They wanted him to lie about Tony. So if this evidence this should have been brought up in trial, but they wouldn't allow these people. One, Don was in jail. So what?
That's
You can get a subpoena to get him out. This is done all the time. If this wasn't a frame job, I don't know what was. They wouldn't allow Bert to test.
We were under a gag order. Remember, we were gagged. Don couldn't say anything.
Exactly, and that was Bert too, because he was under a gag order. And if you guys were locked in, they locked you in a courtroom. By the way, unbelievable.
That's right. I know.
Please send this show, somebody, to Trump along with a letter. Put the link there. Make a CD of it or something, and to get it to him. Listen, Deborah, great show. We're all out of time. I really sympathize, and I'll pray for you guys. And I hope people out there, some of these pastors that run these ecumenical churches, aren't afraid to talk against the Pope and come to your rescue. Thanks a lot, Deborah, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Okay, that was Deborah Ondrisek. We're all out of time. Have a good weekend. We'll be back next week on the Investigative Journal.